I think the honesty is huge in a lot of ways. You can look at honesty as being something that you shy away from, but when you start doing it and it becomes part of your practice, then you can really use that to your own power in stepping into your honesty, because then you're exposed and you've made the choice to expose yourself, and nobody can take that away from you.
My name is Fana Asfa, and after doing the backbreaking work to save and reclaim my own life, my passion now is to help others do the same. Since writing my debut book, Sober Daughter, the amount of people that wanted more inspired me to create this podcast. This space is for both real people and industry professionals to share inspiring experiences and usable tools for us all to connect and heal ourselves together. In today's episode, we'll be discussing Black men in sobriety with Raymond Goulbourne. Remember, stay tuned to the end for some amazing tools to take with you. Since starting his own sobriety and recovery journey, today's guest, Ray Goulbourne, took notice that representing the Black experience or taking into account the unique context of health, wellness, sobriety, and what that means to the Black community and other people of color was missing in recovery spaces. To pay it forward and to progress his own journey, Ray developed the podcast Stacking Days as a way to elevate, explore, and share topics of color from voices and perspectives in sobriety and wellness spaces to help people draw power and community along the way. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome, Ray.
Hey, Fauna, what's going on? Man, you make it. I don't know if this shows up on the video, but you're making me blush with that introduction. Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you very much. No, super happy to be on the Sober Daughter podcast. Obviously, I have a huge affinity for the work that you're doing, and glad to be a part of the project. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. I'm so happy to have you on, and it's something that we're both so passionate about. So I love that we get to dig into this, sobriety, recovery, and representation.
Yep.
And I think that's, you and I have been on this path. I've known you for a bit and I have been following, and I'm a fan. I am a fan
Thank
watching
you.
you navigate your own sobriety journey while making space for Black folks, but particularly Black men,
Yep.
to have a healing platform and permission to get vulnerable, which is what we need.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that. And, it's very true that in creating Stacking Days as a platform, I am creating a space for, Black women, but specifically also like Black men and men of color to come on and be vulnerable. But in that, I find myself oftentimes confronting my own vulnerability and worrying about, how far into it am I stepping? Am I even comfortable in where I'm going within my own vulnerability? So it is in part creating a platform for others to be, vulnerable themselves, but it's also therapeutic in being a tool and a platform for myself to really push my own levels and boundaries around comfort as I continue on my journey of, of self-betterment. So thanks for highlighting that. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it so authentic, is that this is something true to you. And as you create, you are also on this path. And that's what helps people, I think, lean into the vulnerability is when they see other people paving that way. But before we get into, the further details of all of the work that you're doing, I want to talk about what even started your healing journey. How did you decide to start that with sobriety? And when did you know, like, oops, something's got to change here?
I'll give you the quick and honest version. I mean, I like many people had been drinking for decades. You probably can't tell, for the folks who are viewing and listening to this, but I'm in my early 40s. I started drinking in my early teens. So I had basically drank for, 2.5, almost 3 decades, and it meant different things to me at different points in time. But for anyone who's ever kind of gotten into alcohol and it taking, portions of your life over, you recognize that if you're doing it for 30 years, and being that alcohol is such a corrosive drug that is a slippery slope and it's a progressive, disease, at a certain point in time, what was, probably fun, probably very social, can turn into something that's quite dark and very hard to move away from. So by the time I was in my early 40s, I had used alcohol for, social acceptance. I had used alcohol for escapism. I had used alcohol for numbing. I had used alcohol for so many different things that, ultimately, I had been emotionally, kind of handicapped in a way, and I had to learn a lot of things. But in my early 40s, it kind of crescendoed in a moment where I had always been kind of quote unquote high functioning. I had a great job, I had a family, I had a home, all of these things that I had literally white knuckled my way into over,
Yeah.
decades. But I got to a place where, the wheels started to come off, and what started as, a casual date night with my wife turned into an evening that was, ultimately the last straw for me. And I had put myself in physical danger. I had been blacked out in the midst of that experience for, almost 24 hours, and was showing up in a way that was not representative of how I wanted to in front of my children, who were really young at the time. They were 3 and 1. They're 5 about to be 6 and 3 about to be 4 now, and scared the shit out of my wife. And
Mm.
so I think this is an explicit podcast, so I
Yes.
part of my French there, but ultimately scared the hell of my wife. And I was like, look, you know what? I got to do something different. If I don't do something drastically different now, where this portion of my life is clearly becoming unmanageable, I'm going to lose all of these things that I had to work so hard to attain in my life. But I mean, this was in 2021. We were kind of right in the midst of the pandemic. I didn't really know what my tools were, and the things that I could, kind of pull near into myself to support me in this program. So that I had to kind of build for myself to find sobriety and recovery. So I did a few different things. I just said to myself, I'm going to throw everything that I possibly can at this thing that now I've recognized is not working. It's the common denominator across all of the things that are not really successful in my life right now. So I started with going to my general practitioner, and I was prescribed medication. So I went on naltrexone to like wean myself off of the cravings for alcohol, because I was drinking daily. I mean, I was probably drinking a bottle, 2 bottles of wine a day on a normal like day. And then on the
Mhm.
weekend, that's when the whiskey and some of the other things started creeping in. So I was just trying to like, moderate and manage myself through drinking red wine. But ultimately to say, like, I needed to wean myself off of the alcohol itself.
Mhm.
And once I was able to do that, and quite literally start stacking some days, that's when I started going deeper and trying to figure out, how do I heal a lot of the things that I've now shone a light on in at least abstaining from alcohol, that haven't gotten any attention. So all the emotional, kind of issues that I have had, all the delinquency around, how I had been living my life outside of these other high functioning areas. And so I pursued therapy, which was interesting, and I'm still in. I listened to a ton of podcasts, and I read a bunch of Quit Lit, and then I started getting into social media. And for anybody who knows me, I'd never been a proponent of social media. I'd never engaged in social media, but that's where I started finding community and other people who also were people of color, who had been through their own version of what I was going through. And because podcasts were such a huge part of my journey, I said to myself, there's no one place that I can go to where I can see people who look like me, where I can hear people who sound like me, who have gone through similar, cultural experiences in their upbringing as I have, that are also dealing with this other thing, i.e. substance, abuse, i.e. alcoholism, and are on the back end of it, seemingly thriving. So I created Stacking Days to really highlight a lot of those underrepresented journeys, which, at the time when I was going into it, I was looking for them, but there wasn't a one-stop shop for me to go to. So even though I was finding a lot of similarities in the plethora of podcasts that I still tune into to this day, there wasn't a place where I could go to where I was like, oh, okay, I feel like I'm at home right now. And I think there've been a lot of podcasts that have come around over the last like couple years since I've been sober, that highlight a lot more folks that look like you and I. But
Mhm.
my contribution back into the space was to create Stacking Days, so we can start having that conversation around, number one, my own journey, but also number two, how are we maybe approaching our wellness, our development a little bit differently than kind of like the mainstay and the status quo that is very, very public and, and very commercialized in the recovery space. So that's kind of like the story in short.
Yeah. Oh my God. Story in short. I I mean, when you talk about, like when we black out and when we're having these moments in front of our kids and in front of our loved ones and having these, completely degrading experiences, it's still somehow cannot dawn on us that alcohol is the common denominator,
Yeah.
right? And we
Yeah.
need to hear stories like that that can string together this sequence of like, oh my gosh, maybe this isn't just depression. Maybe this isn't just a bad day at work. Maybe I really do have an underlying problem here.
Yeah.
And alcohol seems to be wrapped around each of them. And I love that you share that you got medication. One thing people are so unaware of is that detoxing from alcohol is one of the most dangerous detoxes that you can do.
Yeah.
Because it seems so innocuous because alcohol is like so all over our culture, but it is so poisonous and the body becomes so dependent on it that if we just pull it away, we can die.
Yeah.
Um,
That's actually one aspect that I wasn't sensitive going into it. And I know that in speaking with you, that was something that you highlighted that I know is very much a part of your story. And I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm glad that like that I actually survived that detox without necessarily having the closer kind of medical observation that maybe, I required. I know that you never really know which way your body's going to go
yeah,
once you are starting to do that. And I think for me, fortunately, I was more concerned with like the cravings and the habitual behavior of it, and less so focused on how it was affecting my physical. And I clearly had my own degree of withdrawal, but fortunately, I wasn't in a position where I had to be hospitalized, for example, or and for some people they lose their lives, when
yes.
moving away from alcohol. So I think it's a really important point to highlight. And also, I think it's important to recognize that like don't look at somebody else's story and because they didn't,
Yeah.
stay in and detox under supervision that should be your route because it could be extremely detrimental to your health.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you talked about that because if you are withdrawing from alcohol, any form, any kind, please get medical support.
Yeah.
And this is not something to do on our own, especially if we've depended on it for decades. Our
Yeah.
body's like, are you crazy?
Yeah.
This is how I survive. You're going to
Yeah.
take this away and just trying to keep going to the grocery store? Like, no, we need a full reset here.
Yeah. I mean, it was certainly a very intentional conversation that I had with my practitioner,
Mhm.
right? Like that was probably the first time where I was like, because everybody is asked the question when they go to see their doctor. It's like, do you drink and how many drinks a day do you have? And that was probably the first time where I was
And
like,
how
let
honest,
me,
yeah.
huh?
How honest are we in those things?
Up until that point in time, for me specifically, I
Mhm.
was extremely dishonest.
Yeah.
But in that moment, in that conversation, when I was actually seeking help, I was like, look, this is the deal. I'm doing this every single day. Let me just put it out there. So as a professional, you can best guide me in the direction that I need to take so that I'm safe in trying to move in a new direction for myself.
I love that. And
Yeah.
that's when we know we're ready, is when
Yeah.
we're ready to get honest. When you are honest with somebody about the depths of your drinking, that's when you're ready. Because up until then, we're like, oh, I have a cocktail here, I have 5 drinks there, and then you're blacking out and you can't remember things, or you're having these huge whatever it is, but
Yeah.
that moment you let your guard down, and it's actually called when the ego has been deflated
Yeah.
enough for help to come in. That's our moment of grace. We have a small window to take help because we're willing to be honest.
Yeah, I think honesty is so extremely important. And I do agree that a huge step and milestone for one's individual development is when you can be honest with, someone from the outside, like whether you're, reaching out and being honest with a practitioner, whether you're being honest with friends, family, your support network. But for me, it was even a step. I had to be honest with myself. I didn't subscribe to AA, and I still don't. But I do know that the first step is like acknowledging that you have a problem, right? Like that's a conversation that you're having with yourself. And for the longest time, I wasn't even being fundamentally honest with myself.
Mm.
But I think once you can answer that question for yourself in the wee hours of the night when nobody else is around, then you can start taking steps towards being honest externally. But for me, I had to have some honest conversations with myself first to be like, and even to this day, like I'm almost 3 years sober, there are still things that I'm just like, how much do I want to lean into this from an honesty
Yeah,
standpoint?
yeah.
But no, I think the honesty is huge, and in a lot of ways, you know, you can look at honesty as being something that you shy away from, but when you start doing it and it becomes part of your practice, then you can really use that to your own power in stepping into your honesty, because then you're exposed, and you've made the choice to expose yourself, and nobody can take that away from you.
Oh, I agree. I love the way you said that. Nobody can take it away from you. It's your truth, and it's the complete opposite of addiction. It's like, substance abuse disorder is rooted in denial
Yep.
and the distortion of reality, so that, it takes us into these despairs, so that the only relief we seem to think we have is substance.
Yep.
And so if we can practice honesty, then we have an opportunity to see how else can I cope with what's going on within me, instead of something that's actually killing me.
Yep.
And
Yep.
for you in your early sobriety, I want to know, for those that are listening, especially if there are Black men, or, anyone that's really new to mental health or recovery spaces, what was the hardest part of early sobriety for you, and what did you use to help you? If you're utilizing what you got all around
Yeah.
you, what
Yeah.
was helpful?
Yeah, I think the one of the hardest things for me was just taking accountability for something that that I wanted to hide so badly, right? Like I think that that was really hard for me, and I don't think that's unique to being a Black man, but what I have found is that, and it's funny because I was actually talking to my sister recently about this, is that we as Black men just don't have a whole lot of outlets, to have, honest, vulnerable conversations. And we end up holding a lot, right? Like we hold a lot here, we hold a lot here. And because of that, it's really difficult to get over some of these seemingly really challenging aspects of any type of development, but let alone, moving away from, substance abuse, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was just taking an accountability for something that that it was very much a part of my day to day, the act of drinking, number one, but then taking accountability from everything that came by way of my drinking. So the challenges that and damage that it had done to relationships, the challenges and damage that it had done to my family. I mean, they still love me, but I mean, I wasn't making things easy for anybody. You know what I mean? And I think that confronting all of that and taking responsibility for that was really, really hard for me, because as a Black man, like you almost want to be this example of strength and
Right.
this example and this, of being a pillar for people to lean on, and confronting the fact that sometimes oftentimes, especially when I was drinking, I was doing more harm than good to all of those things that I believed fundamentally was my responsibility to protect and to hold, was really challenging for me.
Mm, so true. It's so true. It's that, ingrained trauma that we have to be strong at all times. And that was true for us, culturally and historically. People of color, Black women and men,
Yeah.
had to be strong and had to put on a brave face. But then there was also this like dual effect that happened, that, others then perceive us as hyper strong, and, we don't experience pain the same way. So we're not offered that softness and those rooms to really break down.
Yep.
And I had the same experience as you. I remember when I first got into treatment, and I had this therapist, and she was like, going through some observations with me. And she's like, you are just so strong. And
Mm.
I said, how dare you say that to me? And
Yeah.
she was so taken aback. And, she was a white woman. And she said, is there something I said? And I was like, I am here in therapy trying to break down. And like, the last thing I want to hear is how strong or resilient I am, because
Yeah.
it's so coded, and it just made me coil back up into, the trauma of it. And I think that's exactly the spaces that we need to have. Is weakness is not vulnerability.
Yeah.
It is a power, it is a strength, but we just haven't been able to tap into that because it hasn't been safe for a long time. And I think we're finally getting to a time where we can create the safety for ourselves and not wait for others to do that. And in sobriety and in recovery, we have to be able to let our guard down.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with what you're saying. I also have, in my experience, it felt like because alcohol is such a numbing agent, it gives you the perception that you are strong, right? Because things are not affecting you, in a very intimate, emotional way, which for me, perpetuated this version of myself that, that ultimately was not serving me, at a certain point in my relationship with the substance, right? So and it led me to a place, and this goes back to why I created the podcast, and we've talked about this offline, is that I think that in order to truly be strong, you also have to be able to be vulnerable and have some softness to you as well. I believe that those two things can live in the same space, because it's been my experience that you can't just be strong, not with everyone, right? And certainly not with yourself all the time, because then you start foregoing a lot of the softer areas that you need to develop in order to be a well-rounded 360-degree person, right? So I hear you, and I think that we are in unfortunate positions as people of color where both the external world expects us to be quote unquote strong, and that is then co-opted our internal view of what strength looks like, and we start subscribing to this, like this botched concept of what it means to be, a strong one. And ultimately, sometimes that does more detriment, to the individual and certainly to our culture than it does good.
Oh, absolutely. You just hit it so spot on. It's the external is enforced and the internal. And for so many of us, for so many years, there's been this divide between how exposed we're willing to be to the varying degrees of, who we are, which I think you shared that coming in. Like, how vulnerable do I get? How much do I show?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? And also, I think, you got to tell me on the side of Black men what are particular barriers, because I know for Black women, especially in recovery, I'm surrounded by much more Black women than I had been in
Yeah.
my early sobriety. But I had to search that out. I had to be really intentional and really purposeful. But in general, I have been seeing women dismantle these kind of oppressive external expectations of them so that they can be really honest and start to heal. And some of the feedback is we're missing our brothers in, these spaces and in these conversations. And so what do you think about if there is a gap in, the healing game? Did women, get a head start in this? Because I for sure think we did.
Yeah.
And what do we do? Because you don't want to be on an island alone. Like, there's the whole point is for us to be able to cultivate and heal together. But what are specific barriers you think for Black men in one, acknowledging sobriety and doing this kind of healing work? And what do you think about, Black men and Black women coming together in this healing new kind of age we're going into?
I mean, I feel like the position that Black men and women are in terms of their healing journeys is such a storied narrative, right? That expands way beyond sobriety, addiction. Like there's so much that we have to heal from, that external substances just takes up one sliver of this larger pie
Yeah.
of healing. And I think that historically it's been really challenging for both Black men and Black women to be able to find that space, that safe space where we can start looking at aspects of ourselves and not feel judged by our peers, not feel as though, our gender roles are going to be questioned by what we are saying
Right.
openly, and not feeling as though that we're, as men, being castrated for exposing, our vulnerability. I think that women, and this is somewhat anecdotal, and then I think also there have been studies put out on this, women are just better at communicating with each other. I feel like they're better, as particularly as they mature in age, better at holding on to friendships, long-term friendships, and meaningful friendships. And I think that as men get older, this is just men more broadly speaking than specifically men of color, we get so hyper like fixated into our roles and expectations that we don't leave any room for anything else. And because we've been so like beat the hell up, we oftentimes don't necessarily know where to go to feel supported and to be able to find that embrace. So I think that there's two probably ways that we can go here. One, again, how do we create an environment where we're kinder to ourselves? I think it starts there. Number two, how do we create spaces where we can be kinder to our brothers, right? So I think that's comes in with creating spaces where we can talk about a lot of these things that ultimately had gone silent for generations, whether it be trauma, whether it be addictions, whether it be whatever fill in the blank. And then past that is then how do we come together as a broader community. If women happen to be further along in this, then hey, can the women bring us up? You know what I mean? Can they invite us into
We're
some of those,
tired. We're
some of
tired.
the so I know you're tired. I get it. I totally get it. But at the end of the day, shit ain't going to change if people aren't willing to do things even when they're tired, right? So I think that it's just a matter of stepping into spaces that are uncomfortable and making it okay for other people to step in there with you. And I'm somewhat trying to do that with my podcast. I know that you are very much a proponent of doing that as well. And there are examples, public examples of others, and doing it either whether or not on an individual basis or by way of creating their own organizations. But I think it's very much a conversation that is both nuanced and also very new. Where even generationally, you look at our parents and our parents' parents. There is so much that had been unspoken, never even touched. And I think about this often. Silence is not an adequate coping mechanism. And I think that until you can kind of push through that, and it's probably will take some generations to do so. I think that we'll collectively be on this journey. But I think similar to like the own individual journey, it takes some baby steps until it can become a little bit more systemic. And I think that in order for it to become more systemic within our community, both as men and as women and men together, we're going to have to take some individual steps. And there are going to be some folks that are going to have to step out there and and make an example of themselves and find other individuals who are willing to step into that space with them.
Well, preach 100%.
I think.
No, I agree. I agree that, this idea of rigidity that, to each on their own and individualistic, like we all have to figure it out alone, is a very colonized conception. It is not how we heal. We have to build community. We
Yep.
have to build shared like-minded spaces where people can be vulnerable and reach their hand out. And that's gonna have to look like Black men and Black women, coming together and finding ways to create this safety together. And
Yep.
that's tough because it's been, this history of our time here in this Western world has been one of, let's create as much divide as we possibly can. The narrative is always divide, 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 divide.
Yep.
And whether it's white and Black, or Black, the sisters and the brothers, or it's this and that, and it's like that, it's such an old ego game, like it just doesn't work. And I think for all of us, that's why I love having our conversations together, you and I.
Yep.
Because this is how we grow. There's no way I can know a perspective uniquely specific to you as a Black man when I am a Black woman navigating sobriety or recovery and healing and therapy, unless I listen.
Yeah.
And unless you're willing to share. And we have to do work to create places where we can share these things. Like, whenever I step into places, I'm like, I'm a complex person. I'm coming in, I've got, a spiritual teacher, spiritual guides. I've done acute therapy, I do
Yeah.
recovery. Like, I'm out here, you know what I mean? And so if it would be easy for me to just snub my nose up and say, well, if you don't do, what are you working on? But at the same time, it's like, how are we helping people get access? And how are we reaching our hand out so more people can do these kinds of things?
Yeah.
I think we've hit the breaking point where if we don't shift out of these old expectations of us, we're gonna just crash and burn
Yeah.
because like you said, the silence is not a coping skill. It's like the secrets keep us sick and we're passing on the sickness, and we've got to start telling the truth.
Yeah. It's funny. It's not funny. You think about this, like the broader like diaspora, right? And I feel like when folks look at, people of color, we're generally fair people, we're loving people, and
Mm.
we oftentimes can provide those things to others, but we don't provide those things to each other.
Wow.
And when you think about this like concept of like unconditional love, right? That one can have for a partner, one can have for a family member. What does unconditional love look like from within our own community for perfect strangers? And I think that that's the sentiment oftentimes that I think about when I have conversations with people that I've never met before, who have been through some real human shit. Is like, how do I bring them into this space where I'm not judging them for anything that they've done,
Mm.
right? Because they can add to the fabric of not only the conversation that I'm having with them, but add to the broader fabric of the conversation that we are all having around our broader well-being. So, like, I think that getting to a space where, we're not being pitted against each other,
Yeah.
whether from a gender perspective, Black men are oftentimes being pitted against one another. I think about like battle royales, right? Like if you've ever read
Yeah.
like Ralph Ellison's, like getting into these like cage matches with one another, like
Yeah.
that's old. Like we don't
It's
need to do,
old.
that's old. We don't need to
Yeah.
do that anymore, right? I mean, this may sound corny, but how do we step into healing rings as opposed to rings of battle with one another? Like whether, it be actual battle, which it happens in our communities all the time, or these proverbial battles where we need to be stronger or present ourselves to be bigger than the other. It's like I'm not interested in that. Like I'm trying to just heal my own shit. And like
Yeah.
and in doing that, I want to be able to heal with my people, right?
Yeah.
And my people are just like my broader community who I happen to share like a racial, identity and some genetics with, and also like my people closer in. So like my origin family and my chosen family and all those other people who I deal with on a daily basis. So but I come from, a place of like, what work am I doing as an individual? And then how ultimately can I then pour that into my broader community and contribute and create spaces where other people want to do it with me.
I love it because that's a huge recovery skill is like focus on ourselves first, how we can heal ourselves so that we can then offer usefulness and, knowledge to other people. So like our number one job is to stay ourselves sober
Yep.
and to continue to do this recovery work so that I can show up for other people and you can show up for other people. And I love that you said the divide is over because I am 100% a firm believer that that is cracking.
I hope so.
And the old school battles that, I mean, even hip hop, where it started to then it morphed into battles. And now, I mean, I'm gonna throw a name out that I shouldn't be saying, but like even if we talk about the Kendrick Lamar and
Ah,
J. Cole right now, it's
yeah.
so prevalent to
Oh,
what's
yes.
happening because they quick just J. Cole went right back into the old mentality of like conquer and divide. And he actually paused. He did recovery tools. He paused. He reflected and audited what happened and what he said. And he took accountability for it. And he said, that is not the way I want to represent myself.
And he apologized and he got criticism for it.
That part.
Right. And that's the
Yeah.
thing for any of those who drive. And I know you drive, Fauna, because you're in LA. I don't know how you get around otherwise, but it's almost like lane keep assistance, right? Where like you're driving your car, and as soon as your car starts veering off into the other lane, if you don't have your indicator on, the car automatically pulls you back into the lane that it
Ooh,
believes that you're
yeah.
supposed to be in, whether or not you know you need to be over in the right lane or not. And like I look at this like Kendrick Lamar and and J. Cole incident, and I'm just like, why did they put lane keep assist on this dude? Like he wanted to like you come correct and apologize. He's not weak for that. You know what I
No.
mean? Like,
I
so,
love the lane correct. That's literally what happened. It's like the old way. I mean, because it's so strong, it's like there's identity in that old conquer and divide. And I loved what happened because we got to witness what healing in Black men looks like on a larger scale. And they both were willing to take those shots because J. Cole apologizing is huge, especially in hip hop. Almost never heard of. And that is what healed masculinity looks like.
yep. I
And
mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's the thing. It's not normalized, right? It's not normalized and it's not accepted. Not only is it not accepted it's not normalized within our own culture, it's also not accepted outside of our culture,
mhm,
which, oftentimes is where a lot of that link keep, assistance pressure is coming from. What I would love to see is like for, the three of them, including Drake, to release a track next week. You know what I mean? Like they all have the resources. They can get into a studio anywhere, Toronto, LA. It doesn't really matter where they go. Like get into the studio and release a track and put it out. You know what I mean? Like I would love to see that. I mean, but that is a good call out, and I think that that's fundamental to a lot of the divides, right? Where it's like, even when you want to come correct, there is a lot of societal and structural pressure that is basically saying that's not cool, and you get criticism and judgment, which as you know, in this at least space of sobriety and recovery, there's no room for criticism and judgment.
yeah,
There's nothing beneficial that can come, by way of that. So I think that's a good call out and a good example as to like where some of the breaks are in the culture, and and how can we potentially like look at it a little bit differently and realize also at the same time how pervasive is it.
I agree. And I think that J. Cole and the whole metaphor of what's happening really shows us like the more we work on our inner self-worth and our inner integrity, which is what recovery teaches us, is the more I can stand on my own truth. So like if I need to apologize to somebody, I'm gonna apologize to somebody. I'm gonna save my ass and not my face. I
Yeah.
know that my life lives on my values and my principles because that's what keeps me in alignment and sober. And I am willing to sacrifice my ego when it needs to happen.
Yeah.
And the more we can dismantle this pervasive ego, which is all it is division. That's, the ego is separateness. Then, we can stand on that and we can be the one that says, look, it's okay. I made a mistake. I apologize. That's what actually being a grown up is.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, taking accountability and doing the next right indicated action. Those are all, principled ways we get to learn in recovery, and we get to be the one that stands up and says, I don't care if you make fun of me. I can live with myself at night.
It's hard though. It's hard to fight
It's
the
hard.
ego.
It's hard to fight the ego. It
It's
is.
hard.
But it's like, the moment I learned, I had this amazing guest on who does the power of awareness. His name is Amit. And
Mm.
we were talking about the ego, and really, truly, the ego, once you practice awareness of the ego, you're officially out of being under the ego spell, right?
Yeah.
Even if you don't think
I
you're
was gonna say it's the whole
doing
adage, like if you can name it, then you can tame it, right? That's it. And so yeah, I
exactly.
hear you.
So we don't give ourselves enough credit. If you can at least, if you're acknowledging it and you're aware of it, that means you're working on it.
Yeah.
And there are a million people who have an unchecked ego that have no idea.
Yeah, and we all have it. I think that's one of the gifts of sobriety is, you're able to walk into these spaces that you may otherwise might have never walked into, right? Like acknowledging and, coming face to face with your ego and wanting to check that. To your point, there are millions of people who don't even know it's such a blind spot. They don't even know that they don't know. And I'm, again, not trying to create this narrative that I'm better than anybody, but I do really appreciate being in a space where I can observe my life in that manner, because I don't think I would be better suited to do that if I was still very much in like my drinking. I wasn't,
Yeah.
because the alcohol is fuel for the ego, if anything. Like
Oh,
in a lot of ways, it allows the ego to charge, to lead in a way with so much power that I personally needed to strip that away in order to, again, have those honest, conversations with myself and put the ego where it needs to be. And again, it's extremely hard. I don't always win, but
yeah.
I
Yeah.
am certainly aware of it, which is, the first step, right?
Progress, not perfection.
There you go.
So, before we go, I just want to send out a little shout out from you. If there is any man out there listening or anybody that connected and identified with you, what are your top 3 tools that just keep you going day to day, that really keep you grounded in your recovery and sobriety?
Man, my top 3 tools, some of them are, I think, accessible to most people. Like I really try to focus on like my physical health. When I stopped drinking, one of the things that I kind of plugged in for the time gap that presented itself
Yeah,
in
that's
me not
fine.
drinking anymore, yeah, was I started working out more. It was the first time in my life where I wasn't working out for like aesthetic purposes. Like I was working out because it made me feel good. I was working out because I felt as though that I needed to put my body and my mind in a position where I could live longer to recoup some of the time that I lost by all the years of drinking. So like so that is like one thing that I do. And I think that also is like trying to like pour back in and and connect, right, with people. And for me, I have young kids. Like I just try to spend as much time as I possibly can with them that is quality time. I mean, if anyone who's a parent, they always, talk about how, those young years they come and they go like that. So for me, it's caused me to be hyper aware of appreciating those moments. And in that, I've tried to be very mindful about the present. Again, easier said than done, but I really do try to focus in on the present because I spent so much time, and I wasted so much time that I want to appreciate the moments that I have today. I also had a bunch of folks in my family and just in my life, whether through old age or circumstance pass in the last couple of years. So it's put a heightened degree of awareness on my own kind of finiteness. So like I recognize that eventually this thing will be over. So I try to be really intentional about what I'm putting in. So that's number 2. And then I think number 3 is just, be gentle with yourself, Like if you're not feeling safe around other people, if you're not feeling safe in spaces, if you can't find places where you can walk in and feel no judgment and feel unconditional love, then try to move towards a space in which you're giving that to yourself. And again, it's easier said than done, but like everything else, it's a journey, right? And I think that being on that path keeps me motivated, in some of the decisions that I've made for a better life for myself.
Woo! Thank you so much, Ray. I think, you gave somebody out there, I mean, a whole lot of somebody's, a lot to, think about and hopefully help them, guide them. And if they're already in this process, like we're the ones that need to reach our hands out. We're the ones that need to help bridge this gap. So thank you for being with us for this super.
Yeah.
I loved this conversation and I'm just so happy to have you here. And I wish you so much success in all your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Fauna. I wish you nothing but success with the podcast. And I know before getting on here, you were just talking about the growth and further iterations of the work you're doing. So I'm here for it. I'm here to support it. Just pick up the proverbial phone and hit me up. I'm here to support.
Yes. Well, okay. So plug, how do people connect with you? What are your socials?
Yeah, pretty straightforward. It's, Instagram, TikTok, it's at Stack and Days. So STACKNDAYS. You can also find the show at www.stackanddays.com, spelled the same way. And, look, anybody who's got questions, particularly if you're a man of color, hit me up. You know what I mean? Like I've spoken to enough folks at this point. I hopefully can point you in the right direction as far as resources. And if you just need a non-judgmental dude to just kind of get something off your chest, like, hit me up. I'm pretty much available on Instagram, or you can hit me on email. It's just rdg@stackanddays.com. So fun again. Appreciate the opportunity. Love the show.
Love it. Well, thank you everyone for joining in today's episode of Sober Daughter Podcast. Be sure to check back next week. We're going to have another incredible guest sharing inspiring experiences and usable tools for us all to heal and empower ourselves together. If you want to send a question in for an episode or get the latest episode, follow us at Sober Daughter Podcast on IG, same as the website. And if you want to know what the hell I'm up to, you can follow me at Fauna Aspa on all socials. So thanks again for joining, and remember, keep doing the good work.